tell. Do I sit down or just stand right here? I'm on this one.
See yourself right there. Yep. We're live.
We're live. All right. Peace and blessings, world. It's Kimon Freeman here in DC's only independent media outlet, We Act Radio, broadcasting live on the radical side of Martin Luther King Avenue, celebrating our 5th anniversary. And we wanted to bring it in by doing a screening of 13th, the great documentary, the Academy Award, Oscar-nominated, worthy documentary from Ava DuVernay, who has decided to respond to the Trump victory by promoting group screenings of 13th this weekend, Friday and Saturday. And so we got to jump on things tonight. November 11th, 2011, at 11 a.m. is when we was founded. So this is our 5th anniversary, and we felt there was no fitting way but to join Ava DuVernay in a group discussion and the group screening of this project. I think this is a grand opportunity for us to seize the time that this is the first opportunity that the mainstream can really hear and accept radical thought. I think the election of Trump will call into question the Electoral College, call into question the plurocracy of our nation, Citizens United, so forth and so on. I think that we need to organize and create an agenda for our demands and a working agenda to see that we achieve those things. And that's what We Act Radio is here to do. We're Actors Radio Station, here to amplify the voices of all those who feel left out, distrodden, and oppressed. And I think that this is our time, and I'm so happy that we are here in a position with the launching of our new studio to be of service to those who want to do the work that's needed to be done. So I want to turn, with having said that, I want to turn this over to our illustrious our panel here. But as I close, I want to say to our president, Barack Obama, and his family, we want to thank you for all the beautiful memories, the great flyest parties the White House has ever seen, and the beautiful pictures. And hopefully on your way out, you would do something that benefits those who have came before you, that made the ultimate sacrifice for our liberation. We'd like to see some of these names on your pardon list on your way out. Ashada Shakur is on top of that list. Leonard Peltier is on top of that list. And we would like to see you talk directly about Mumia Abu-Jamal's campaign and other freedom fighters, our heroes, so that we can actually have some qualitative change and discussions about the issues that were addressed in 13th. It's only fair, it's only right, and as We Act Radio, our motto is to do something. So thank you for tuning in, thank you for listening, and please join the revolution. Our time is now. And with that, no further ado, I'll turn it over to our panel.
Are we still on, Brad? Okay, great. Well, I am Aaron Holmes. We are live from We Act Radio on the 5th anniversary of this wonderful station, which is committed to making sure that the voice of the community is heard. We just got finished watching 13th, which is a riveting documentary on mass incarceration. And I want to turn to the panelists, not just about how we got here, which is what a lot of the film is about, sort of where we're going. And I want to start with introducing Scott Roberts. Scott Roberts is the Senior Campaign Director around Criminal Justice at Color of Change. Rashad Robinson, who is featured in the film, is the Director of Color of Change, Executive Director of Color of Change, and he introduced the topic of ALEC in the film and sort of corporations and their relationship to politicians. And you guys are doing some really interesting work in that space, and I would love for you to share it with us.
Appreciate it, Aaron. I'm glad to be here and to talk about these issues. Obviously very excited about 13th as a film, telling the story of the connections that corporate America has to our criminal justice system. And yeah, a lot of our work has been about disrupting the relationships that these profiteers have, folks who are benefiting from the status quo in our criminal justice system. Right? So that includes, you know, the obvious folks like private prisons, but also the bail industry, the companies that are contracted within prisons, like healthcare companies, things of that nature. It includes folks who are invested in private prisons, but it also includes folks who weren't not as much a focus on the film, that are not necessarily even corporate targets, right? So we have local municipalities that are profiting off of kind of a law and order approach to government, as we saw in Ferguson, where you have basically predatory revenue generation by local governments, right, where they are going out and giving folks tickets, locking folks up, forcing folks to pay to get out, and it generating like a lot, in some cases, most of their revenue from these types of practices. And then we were looking at the political level, like who benefits politically from this kind of law and order approach, and the folks that we've really zeroed in are local prosecutors, local elected prosecutors, folks who are who have a tremendous amount of power within the criminal justice system, determining who is going to be charged, what they're going to be charged with, what folks' bail amounts are going to be, influencing the sentences that people receive. And so for us, it's about going after those folks, telling that story of who's really benefiting, but also disrupting those relationships. So yes, we have sought to interrupt, for instance, the private prison industry's relationships with politicians. We campaigned on Hillary Clinton, getting her to give up, cut off ties with a lobbyist who was representing the private prison industry at the beginning of her campaign. But at the same time, we see massive support from the industry for Donald Trump and a lot of the folks who he's going to be working with going in. And then
Well, I think you raise an interesting point, and I sort of want to bring in our other guest, Emily Tatro. Emily Tatro works at the Council for Court Excellence and is a lawyer. And so when Scott mentions things like local attorneys and the relationship between private corporations and prison here in DC specifically, can you speak to those things and what your organization, the Council for Court Excellence, is doing in that space?
Sure, and thank you for having me here tonight. Just a little bit of background about the Council for Court Excellence. For almost 35 years now, the Council has worked on local justice reform issues. So we do research, we do policy work, and we do advocacy work. And our criminal justice work has focused a lot around looking at reentry, actually, people coming home from prison and jail, and making sure that they are being served by the systems we have in place so that they can come home and be a part of the community. And then also looking at the different pieces of the justice system itself and trying to figure out where our systems are working and where they're failing. The systems in DC are pretty unique because we are a federal district and not a state or a city ourselves. And so our system here is more complicated than in most places. We actually don't have local prosecutors per se. We have the U.S. attorneys prosecuting most of the local offenses here in the district. And so those that mix of local and federal power can make it really difficult for people to know what's happening in the justice system and to have influence over it because the power isn't concentrated here in the district.
Well, can you speak to, so the district recently decided to end its relationship with CCA at the Central Detention Facility, or the Central Treatment Facility, I'm sorry. And can you speak to what led to that?
So CTF is the Correctional Treatment Facility. They've had a contract for the last 20 years with the Corrections Corporation of America, and that contract ends at the end of January. So starting February 1st, the district will take control of that building really for the first time and will directly operate and run the building. That's something that Mayor Bowser decided last year was necessary. It came after after the city had been considering handing over the healthcare contract at the Department of Corrections to Horizon, which is a private for-profit prison healthcare industry, and advocates and community members and stakeholders had really come out strongly against that and got City Council to kill that contract, and to keep that contract in the hands of Unity, which is a community nonprofit healthcare provider here in DC. And so people are excited about the opportunity to get that back in government hands, and also really I think the community is very interested in seeing what happens next, because we have 2 jail facilities right next to each other right now. CTF is the newer of the 2, but CDF, the jail next door, the Central Detention Facility, is old and the facility is crumbling and needs to be replaced.
So we need to rebuild it.
And so as we're starting to build that, thinking about who's running it, who's building it, and what the community's saying that will look like.
And we're doing it with community input, which really brings me back to Scott. So Scott, you guys are doing a lot of grassroots work within the community to make sure that their voice is being heard on issues like this. And I'm curious to know what kind of community tools you have and can suggest to the community to make sure that we continue to have a say in these types of relationships.
Yeah, Code of Change, we're the nation's largest online black organizing group. So a lot of our tools are digital. I think the primary thing for us is our online campaigns platform, Organize For. Folks can go to organize4.org. It's a place where you can build your own online petition campaign. We have a team of folks that work with petition starters to train folks in digital organizing skills to help promote your petition if you start one, and the resource of our membership, which is over 1 million people on our email list around the country. And so for us, it's about
1 million is a lot of people, Scott.
No, 1 million is a lot of people. No, for sure. And
it is a testament to the work that you're doing.
Right, but it has to be a resource for our community.
Sure.
Right? And we take that seriously. So one part of our aim is building out the black digital grassroots. Just in my experience of being organized and working with racial justice groups around the country, often it's the digital and the communications aspect that's missing. So we're doing a lot of work there, and what we really want to see is more folks using that to take on these types of relationships, to do the type of work that Emily's talking about, to put pressure on decision makers to make institutional changes to cut out these folks, but also we can put pressure on these politicians to cut off their political relationships with these folks, stop taking these contributions from the prison industry, and target the corporations themselves. So there's lots of campaign things that people can do, and Organize For is a great tool for people to do that work.
So you're leading us into this great point, and it's the intersections between the work that you guys do. Emily, how much easier is it to do your work with the sort of social lubricant that's provided by organizations like Color of Change? Because I do assume that you deal with local politicians around policy that impacts communities of color.
Community voice is so important. That's how the Horizon contract was killed off a couple of years ago of the DC Council. And these are issues that really just affect everyone in DC. Last year there were 23,000 people on any given day that were under correctional control, adults here in DC. That's 1 in 22 adults in our city. So it's something that affects people, families, neighborhoods, and something that we should all be paying attention to, especially because we're really, I think, at a moment here in DC where with the new jail and with needing to find a new director for the Department of Corrections and a new chief of police, we're really at a moment where there can be some sea change if people speak up and ask for exactly what it is that they want.
Awesome. And so, Scott, you talk a lot about grassroots and disseminating information, sourcing information. How important is that? So when we start looking at 13th and some of the things that we're talking about in the future of law enforcement, GPS tracking and so on and so forth, how important is it that you source the information from the community? And maybe, I mean, so there's a formula to that. You can have fixed format where you put out a petition and someone says, hey, like, we don't want GPS tracking, but how much is it, or how important is it to ground the voice of the community in story or volume in a way that really lands itself with the body politic?
Yeah, I think that's crucial, and for us, we found that 9 times out of 10, if you want to help the black community and a larger, multiracial set of allies that want to end mass incarceration, to really reach the broader public and get kind of mass attention on an issue, we have to have those stories of real impact that it's having in people's lives, right?
Absolutely.
And the storytelling is so crucial. Some of the things that we're doing are trying to impact both how the media is talking about criminal justice, but also we've been working a lot with, for lack of a better word, Black Hollywood, like people like Ava DuVernay, to try to influence the storylines coming out of Hollywood, not only to have a better portrayal of Black people in on television and in movies, but also to tell the stories of who our real enemies are, to talk about the bail system, to talk about private prison companies, to talk about predatory policing and revenue generation. So all of that's crucial, and then I think for us, the other thing is just, we have we're able to test and experiment with things. So we can try and tell the stories, try and get folks mobilized around issues. But what we found is over and over again, there's the individual cases. This is what we've seen with policing, right? Sure. So I think with the rest of these issues, we have to be able to tell the story of the impact that it's having on people.
Yeah.
It was very hard to talk about things like bail reform until recently, where we have stories like those featured in the film of Khalif Browder or Sandra Bland, and giving people a real image of what's happening to our people in these jails when they haven't even been convicted. So all of that is crucial. And I think the real key is, like, how do we get that story internalized within the community so it's secondhand. I think when we talk about policing, people have an understanding, there's a problem with harassment, with violence, whatever, with policing, and we need to, like, be able to tell a deeper story and make it, a shared narrative within our community.
Sure. So what's awesome about 13th and Ava DuVernay is that I think 13th is a really responsible documentary. I don't think that it goes too far right or left. It sort of plainly speaks to some challenges that exist within the Black community around mass incarceration and some of the systems that are standing right now, which make it very difficult for us to end that prison industrial complex. And as you start to look at the film and some of the folks who are in it, Jelani from the University of Connecticut, who ultimately says you're looking for a medium that validates your experience. And so the Queen Sugars, the Selmas, the works of Ava DuVernay, which are very, very prevalent and timely, are important. And they raise issues like bail, and they give folks a platform to talk about issues that really, really do affect communities at large. And so I want to push this thing to bail because I know you guys do a lot of bail work over at CCE, and I want to hear, I know DC is a little different, but a snapshot of how DC is different, and then sort of why DC is so different.
Yeah, so DC actually doesn't have a bail system anymore, and what we do have really is a model for the country. We, instead of using people's ability to pay to decide whether or not they stay in jail while they're awaiting trial, we have the Pretrial Services Agency, which is a federal agency here that has local jurisdiction over DC co-defenders. They use risk assessments, which are research-validated tools that say that you use to determine how much of a risk it is to let someone out in the community. And you do the math and add it up, and if someone is a risk, then you keep them in jail. and if someone is not likely to be a risk, then you let them go, and there's no money involved. It's all using the validated instrument, and so that's something that I know pretrial services has really been talking to different jurisdictions around the country that are interested in trying to get rid of money bail, since the system has worked pretty well here for a number of years now.
Well, that's fantastic. So one of the things that I also want to say, just really quick, one-word answer, do you think that the D.C. model is a model for the rest of the country?
For pretrial release, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, that's fantastic. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, yeah, real quickly, I totally agree. I think the core thing to understand about what's happening with DC in terms of pretrial detention, because that's what we're talking about when we talk about folks who, after they've been arrested but they haven't been convicted, whether or not they have to be incarcerated, right? And just considering what we say about folks being innocent until proven guilty, we think that ought to be at a minimum, right? Like you're really only holding someone before trial if you know they're a huge danger to our community. But currently our system is set up not for that purpose, not to protect our community, right? Not to keep us safe, not to get justice for people who have been impacted by crime. It's set up to generate revenue for these profiteers, like the bail bonds industry. So you're seeing people, I saw a recent case, a guy stole like $27 worth of food, like dine and dash, right? He got his food, he bounced without paying. His bail was $15,000. You know, what is justice for that restaurant? It's he could have paid them back hundreds of times over
Right.
with the bail that he was hit with. But really, the system is set up to benefit the bail bondsmen who have incredible power in our political system.
Absolutely. Well, so we've been having this discussion here around the documentary 13th, and I appreciate you guys being here. We had a room full of people who contributed to, who are ready to contribute to that conversation. And I want to introduce Zagat Free, who wants to ask a question. So, go for it, my friend.
No, I didn't know we were asking questions. I don't even know who you two are actually. So I just want to say power to the people. Let's let all the captives free. We need to end imprisonment in America, and we need to build a better model. And if it takes burning this sucker down, then let it burn. Because every change comes from radicalism. The founding fathers were radicals. Those that were involved in the freedom movement of the 60s and the 50s and on since we've ever been here, from Marcus Garvey to today, were radicals. So we're not here to take any concessions. We're ready to change this thing immediately. And if it takes some bloodshed, so be it. Peace.
Well, thank you for that.
If I could jump on one thing that he said in terms of being able to produce alternatives, I think that's crucial, because what we see over and over again is that our communities, we will create a lot of presence around these issues, right? Create a crisis moment where people are saying we need to do something about policing, for instance, or we're over incarcerating. But the solutions that we get from our political leaders, because they're under so much influence from the folks who are profiting from the system, we create. Just as a real quick example, because I know we got someone else who wants to contribute to the conversation, but thinking about body cameras, for instance, right? When we saw this crisis coming after Ferguson, this need to deal with police violence, political leaders said, okay, we hear you. Here's our solution, body cameras. And what that really did was just invested millions and millions of more dollars into police departments, into surveillance, into evidence gathering against our folks, making it easier to lock us up. And on the flip side, they're not even allowing us to see the video from these cameras. Like, for instance, what we saw in Charlotte, North Carolina now has a law. We got to go to court just to be able to release the video. So we got to be thinking about what it is that we want and what the outcomes from the system we want are. Otherwise, if we just kind of raise a fuss, we end up getting these false solutions from our so-called leaders.
I totally agree, and that's something that I think we should revisit before we close out. I'm gonna let Dimas come to the microphone.
Absolutely, and thank you guys for allowing us to come in and speak. My name is Dimas of the Dimas Show, which is featured here on WEAC Radio on Wednesdays from 7 to 8 o'clock. And my understanding is that this conversation is about mass incarceration. I like to always break things down to its simplest form. When we talk about mass incarceration and we talk about the concept of perception versus reality, you start with a movie that we saw featured in the film 13th Amendment, which was Birth of a Nation. And what the Birth of a Nation film did was take a perception, which was simply a perception, and make it a reality. So just to keep things very, very simple, I mean, I could overcomplicate this conversation and add many, many other quotes or things that I've read or things that we've seen in the media, but I just think that we need to capture this idea of mass incarceration and fight it with the tools that it's been perpetuated with since the turn of the century, which is to fight this perception with reality. With YouTube, let's show the people that are perceived to be X way or perceived to be these criminals, well, then show them. You have the power of YouTube. You have the power of Facebook Live. You have the power of Periscope. So show the world who you are. You have the power to produce your own films. You have the power to produce your own commercials. You have the power to produce your own segments. I mean, WEAC Radio is an example of that power to take media in its current form in 216 and create a platform to present new ideas where you can counterbalance this perception or this reality. So that's in short, that's all I have to say about it. Is if you want to talk about mass incarceration, the basis of this whole idea is a perception that has become a reality. So I say that all to say, let's use our social media. Let's use our Facebook Live. Let's use Periscope. Let's use Snapchat. Let's use Instagram. Let's use Twitter to change the narrative of this perception. Let's do it through that. Let's do it through that. Let's use the tools that we have. Every single one. This isn't my phone, but everyone has one of these right here. This device here is extremely powerful. Devices like this shifted the balance of power in Egypt, shifted the balance of power in other places in the Middle East and in Europe. Use this exact same tool here to at least create the narrative, change the narrative, and change this perception and this reality with this here. So you have the power. We have the means to control this, and this is a very powerful tool. So that's all I have to say about mass incarceration is show who you really are, so America can see that may be how you perceive a certain group of individuals, but in reality, there's something very, very different. So use your phones, use the platforms that are out there, and be the change that you want to happen. So those are my thoughts.
So one of the things that we're trying to do at the Council for Court Excellence, we have a report actually on reentry in DC coming out in December, and rather than just filling it with the statistics and with the policy research, we conducted interviews and held focus groups to get the voices of people who are directly affected by their time in prison and jail in the report, and took portraits of 30 different returning citizens that we'll have illustrating the report, because I think what that gentleman said is exactly right, that people need to see what these people look like and hear in their own words how mass incarceration has affected their lives and continues to do so even after they come home.
So this is an open discussion, and we would love to hear what you have to say. We ask that you keep it under like 5 hours.
5 hours or 5 minutes?
No, you're fine.
Oh, okay. No, seriously, like, what's my time limit? 5 minutes?
No. 2 would be
Good?
absolutely.
Okay. You gonna ask me any questions?
We're on.
Oh well.
This is not.
What'd you think about the film?
I love the film. Do I just look? I love the film. I'm actually helping to host the film screenings because I just feel like this film is so poignant and that people need to see this film, just because mass incarceration is a problem in our society and in our country. And I don't think this film really opened my eyes to it being a problem. I really didn't realize how big of an issue it was. Like he said, there's a lot of people that don't know what's going on behind that. We don't even know that many prisons exist, they're kind of in rural America.
That's right.
And then we don't know what's going on behind those walls. Like once people go, they kind of disappear. So I feel I'm working with different organizations like National Black United Front, and then I partnered with Common here at WEAC Radio just to kind of help get that message out that this is a real problem. And we need to have our eyes on
what stood out
it.
the most to you in the film?
Wow. I think what stood out the most to me was just that number doubling almost every decade?
Yeah,
It's almost every decade that number. Every time I saw that number go up, it was almost like this shock. Like every decade is double. Like it's not getting any better. And this is supposed to be the land of the free. And I just feel like, how is it the land of the free if a majority of us are in jail or in prison?
And what do you think, after looking at the film, is the pathway forward? So the film speaks to how we got here in
Right.
a lot of respects. And what do you think is the answer moving forward?
I personally feel like they are going to find another way just to read it. You know, like they said, like they're just going to find another way to redesign what's already been happening since we black people arrived here or brown people came to America. And like he said, there's so much money involved in it. And it's always been us being, like black people being that currency, like what's making that money. So it's like, how's America going to replace that? So it's so big money, big industry that I just feel like at this point, I just feel like they're going to try to repackage it another way. And I personally, as an activist, believe that this time black people need to have their eyes open and need to be ahead of the game. Like instead of us just constantly kind of letting things happen to us and just acting like going along with it. Like the one guy said, I didn't remember his name, but he was like, it's going to take the citizens to take it back and stop it. You know, we're going to have to rise up because when things affect, I don't, you know, some people do realize it, but when things affect the black race, it affects everyone. You know, it affects, is somebody you know that could be going to jail, like it could be a brother-in-law or something like that. Like, so even if you're not black or brown, or even Muslim or whatever, that's why so many people are protesting Donald Trump, because it's like, everybody has to know someone. It's like that 6 degrees of separation. Someone knows someone is Muslim or black or Hispanic. And at the end of the day, this is America. This is not what we're supposed to be about. So it's like, we're going to live what we say we are and go by those values, or admit that we're a fascist society that's just locking everybody up and we're really not free at all.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you
know?
stepping in, right? and sharing. Yeah, absolutely. That was.
You're welcome. I have fun.
Appreciate you hanging out and watching the
You
film.
guys take care.
Do the same. Okay, so she raises a fantastic point and sort of touches on something that we've been talking about, and we can sort of end on this note. So we are speaking about money in politics, and this is something that you touched on, or money in this business in general, and how we sort of remove money from not just the prison system, but other spaces that corporations are looking to secure their interest inside of. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that. I'll start with Emily and then make my way to Scott.
Well, I think that it's something that can be difficult to do on the back end once those interests are already vested, and is something the woman who was just in here mentioned, you know, keeping your eyes open to see what the next thing is and cutting people off. And I think that's the most important. As we are starting to decarcerate and we're keeping more people home, on home confinement, we have GPS bracelets, and those are coming from private companies, and private companies are oftentimes running how those work too, making lots of money there. So that's certainly a growing sector of the industry. And I think that as the justice-involved population starts to shift where we have them, you really have to think ahead of time about what services will be needed and whether we want our government to take control of that or whether we're okay with selling it out.
So before I go to Scott, and I want to go to Scott on the same issue, I think you raise a great point that I just want to touch on briefly, and that's just linear solutions, right? So when we start to look at financial impact on areas like GPS bracelets, we look at how much it costs the city without looking at how much it costs the family. So taking that offender from the actual jailhouse and putting them in the home, that person still needs to be fed, that person still needs to be sort of bathed and clothed, and those things now turn to the family themselves as opposed to the state.
That person may also have to pay for the GPS monitor themselves too. So.
Sure. No. And that was just my point. I think you raised a great point. And then I want to motion to you on the same issue.
Yeah, no, I think that's crucial. And just on this issue of these profiteers trying to reorient themselves, we saw a very literal example last week. I don't know if y'all saw this, but CCA, Corrections Corporation of America, which is heavily featured in the film, did a rebranding last week. They're now known as CoreCivic, and they are doing a bunch of different things. One of them is basically private parole, this GPS monitoring stuff. So like, not only are they moving into new areas, but they're trying to shake off the kind of what negative energy we have been able to put on the stigma thing. Right? So like, we definitely got to be on top of that. Sure. I think that story needs to be told.
I think their stock prices also soared this week after Trump was elected.
Yes. Sure. So, but I think that's what's key to me is like, when we say, what are we going to do and what about all this money in the system? Remember that the money in the system is our money, right? Like, we talked about this right after the Department of Justice, when I say we, I mean color of change. We talked about this right after the Department of Justice decided to phase out its contracts with private prison companies, something that will likely be now reversed by Donald Trump, who is like, in the pocket of the private prison industry. But at that time the stocks plummeted, they took a huge hit. But what's really been happening is that the federal government and state governments as well, there's just like a vicious cycle. Politicians take this money and they're lobbied by corporations that spend millions to affect criminal justice policy that influences the decisions that they make. Then our tax dollars, which they control, go into these companies. These companies become more profitable. They have more to spend to lobby, do electioneering, and the cycle just continues. So like, if folks wake up to that, and like people did in DC with the jail, right? Like, and if for instance, people in California, right? Like, we don't control the federal government anymore. We can't get DHS out of private prisons likely in the near future. But in a place like California, which has a huge, kind of progressive coalition within the state, ends their private prison contracts is a huge blow to the industry. It's less a power for them, right? And that's the thing. They're still out power from us, locking us up, and in turn, they're turning around and building their own. And the last thing I'll say is, in terms of the money, we have to have an economic program, both for the communities that have been hardest hit by the industry. That has to be our alternative, right? Sure. But also for the communities that are going to be hardest hit by reform. Remember that in a lot of these places where we saw Donald Trump dominate, small rural places, these are prison towns now. I'm from a place like that. Where I'm from is majority black, but in the 90s we lost manufacturing. What came in were 4 different prisons, and those folks where I'm from, maybe the majority of people I know work in the prison as guards, nurses, teachers, whatever. So we have to be able to present to those folks an alternative also for their local economies. Otherwise, we're going to meet resistance. It's going to be harder to convince politicians, but also we're going to economically devastate some of these areas. So,
well, I think you raise a great point. I mean, it's really important that we not just talk about the front end, but that we talk about the back end as well. The back end is critical when it comes to reform. If we only look at sort of what we're going to be charging folks with and not the repercussions of like the bail system and all the things that we discussed, then you really will run into a situation where you have a population of folks who are not quite prepared to contribute economically based on what happens to them in the justice system, and that's unfortunate. So, I mean, we could talk about this all day. I really appreciate you guys being with me today. Again, we are at We Act Radio, celebrating the 5th anniversary of We Act Radio here at Anacostia. I want to thank Scott and Emily for being with us. I also want to thank Brad, who is behind the cameras over there. Thank you for being with us today, and we will see you soon. Thank you, sir. Thank you guys, man. You guys were awesome.